There was no going back. Her sister needed her, and she wasn't going to let the soldiers win. Together, they moved through the settlement, staying close to the shadows. They didn't speak much, knowing that any noise could give them away. The settlement was small, but the people who lived here were kind, and Lyra felt a pang of guilt for dragging them into this. If the soldiers found out that she and Jake had been hiding there, the settlement would be in danger. They reached the edge of the settlement and looked out at the vast desert stretching before them. In the distance, they could see the supply depot. It was heavily guarded, just as it had been the day before when Lyra had tried to steal water. She could still hear the sound of the soldiers' voices in her head, their cold, angry shouts echoing through her mind. It was a terrifying thought, but Lyra knew that they had no other choice. "We'll need to get to the depot," Jake said, breaking the silence. "If we're going to get the water, we have to go there." Lyra hesitated. "It's too dangerous." "We won't make it." "We don't have a choice," Jake replied. "We fight or we die, but we do it together." Lyra looked at him, her heart pounding. She had never fought like this before. She had always been a survivor, always on the run, always trying to stay one step ahead. But now with Jake by her side, she felt a strange sense of confidence. She wasn't alone anymore. They set off toward the depot, their movement swift and purposeful. The sun was high in the sky now, making the desert heat unbearable, but neither of them slowed down. They had no time to waste. As they approached the depot, Lyra could see the soldiers stationed at every corner, their weapons trained on the horizon. It was impossible to get close without being seen, but Jake wasn't deterred. He knew what he was doing. He had done this kind of thing before, and he had survived. "Stay close," Jake said. "I'll create a distraction. When I do, you move fast. Get to the water supply." Lyra nodded, her eyes locked on the depot. She could see the large metal doors where the water was stored. That's where she needed to be. But she couldn't shake the fear in her chest. What if they didn't make it? What if they were caught? Jake reached into his bag and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and a faint humming noise filled the air. It was a sound Lyra had never heard before, but she trusted Jake. He had a plan. She had to trust him. "Go," Jake whispered. Lyra didn't hesitate. She took off toward the depot, moving as fast as she could without drawing attention. The sun beat down on her, but she didn't stop. She could see the guards in the distance, but they didn't seem to notice her yet. She had to make it to the door. She had to get inside. As she neared the water supply, she heard a loud explosion in the distance. It was the distraction. Jake had set it off. The guards immediately turned their attention toward the sound, giving Lyra the opening she needed. She reached the door and quickly slid inside, her heart racing. She could hear the sound of boots pounding behind her, but she didn't look back. She had to move. Inside, the room was cold and dark, a stark contrast to the heat outside. The shelves were lined with large metal containers filled with water, just as she had hoped. But there was no time to waste. She grabbed the first container she could find and hoisted it onto her back. She could feel the weight of it, but it didn't matter. Her sister was depending on her. Outside, Jake was fighting the soldiers, distracting them as best as he could. Lyra could hear the sounds of weapons firing and shouts of anger, but she didn't stop. She had to get back to him. She had to make it out. With the water secured, Lyra made her way back toward the exit. The door creaked as she pushed it open, but there was no time to be careful. She had to get out, and fast. The moment she stepped outside, she saw Jake. He was standing near the entrance, holding off the guards with his blaster. He didn't look worried, even though he was outnumbered. He was focused, his eyes sharp and steady. Lyra could see the determination in his face. He wasn't going to let anything stop them. She ran toward him, and without a word, they both turned and sprinted back toward the settlement. The sound of soldiers shouting echoed behind them, but they didn't look back. They couldn't afford to. The only thing that mattered now was getting away. They ran through the desert, their legs burning from the effort. But they didn't stop. They pushed forward, knowing that if they slowed down, they would be caught. Lyra's heart raced as she thought of her sister. The water was so close. She could make it. They could make a dot as they reached the edge of the settlement. They could hear the sound of the soldiers' vehicles in the distance. They were close. Too close. But Jake didn't slow down. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into the safety of a nearby cave. The two of them collapsed against the cool walls of the cave, panting for breath. They had made it. They had actually made it. Jake looked at Lyra, his face covered in sweat, but there was a smile on his lips. We did it. Lyra could hardly believe it. She had done it. She had fought for her sister. And in that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning. They had faced the odds and won. And together, they would keep fighting. The new beginning. Cave was quiet. The only sound the soft rustle of sand as the wind picked up outside. Lyra sat against the cool rock wall, her body exhausted from the long journey. The water they had fought for was now safely in the cave with them, and although the weight of it had felt heavy on her back, it was nothing compared to the weight of what she had just done. The fear and adrenaline that had pushed her forward now faded, leaving behind a calm that she hadn't felt in a long time. Jake sat beside her, his eyes scanning the entrance of the cave, his face serious. They both knew that their escape wasn't over. The soldiers were still out there, still searching for them. But for now, they had a moment of peace, a chance to breathe. Lyra turned to look at him, her voice barely a whisper. We made it. We actually made it. Jake gave her a small smile, but his eyes remained sharp, always on alert. Yeah, but this is just the start. We still have a lot of work to do. Lyra nodded, understanding what he meant. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. Her sister still needed the water, and the soldiers wouldn't give up so easily. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. There was no turning back now. But for the first time since she had started this journey, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. It was small, but it was there. They had beaten the odds and made it out of the depot alive. They had fought for something worth fighting for. And in that moment, Lyra realized that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe they could change the way things were on Zorath. Jake turned to her, his voice soft but firm. You've got the water. Now we need to get it to your sister. And after that, we need to figure out how to deal with the soldiers. We can't keep running forever. Lyra looked down at the water container beside her. It seemed so simple, yet it was the key to everything. Her sister's life depended on it. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. I'll do whatever it takes, Lyra said, her voice steady now. We'll get this to her. We'll make sure the soldiers don't stop us. Jake's gaze softened, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. You've got more than just water to fight for now, Lyra. You've got your people, and you've got me. Lyra's heart skipped a beat at his words. It wasn't the first time he had said something like that, but this time it felt different. He wasn't just helping her survive. He was fighting beside her, as an ally, as someone who cared. Thank you, Lyra said, her voice quieter than she intended. You've done more for me than I ever expected. Jake nodded, his eyes meeting hers. We're in this together. We'll figure it out. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, like two people who had found something. worth fighting for. Lyra wasn't alone anymore, and she didn't have to face this fight by herself. After a few moments, Jake stood up, looking toward the entrance of the cave again. "We should get moving. We've got a long way to go." Lyra stood as well, the water container still heavy on her back. She had grown used to the weight, but the responsibility that came with it was something she couldn't ignore. Her sister was depending on her. She couldn't fail. They left the cave together, stepping into the harsh sunlight once again. The desert stretched out before them, endless and unforgiving. But this time, the heat didn't seem so overwhelming. They had a purpose now, a reason to keep moving. As they walked, Lyra couldn't help but glance at Jake. He was different from the others she had known. He wasn't just a soldier fighting for himself. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for her. And that meant more than anything. They moved quickly, staying close to the rocks and dunes for cover. The soldiers might be looking for them, but they had a head start. They just had to keep moving. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip low in the sky. Lyra felt the strain in her legs, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her sister was waiting. And they were so close now. The water was almost there. Finally, they reached the small settlement where Lyra's sister had been staying. The people there were wary of them, but when they saw the water, their faces softened. Lyra's sister was lying in a small hut, her face pale and covered in sweat. She was weak, but when she saw Lyra, her eyes brightened with recognition. Lyra rushed to her side, placing the water beside her. "Here," she said, her voice trembling. "It's for you, drink." The thief in the desert. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun beat down with a fierce intensity, its rays burning through the thick atmosphere of the planet Zurath. It was a planet where water was the most valuable thing. It was rare and controlled by the alien overlords who ruled the land. The people of Zorath were used to the heat and the dryness, but the lack of water made life harder than it should be. In the middle of this vast desert, Lyra ran. She was an alien girl, young but strong. Her body was slim, her dark green skin blending into the dusty landscape. Sweat dripped down her face, but she didn't stop. The sound of boots pounding on the ground grew louder behind her. The security guards were close, their voices calling out in angry shouts. They had spotted her. She had been caught trying to steal water from one of their highly guarded supply depots. She had been desperate. Her sister was sick, and the water was the only way to save her. Lyra had made the decision to take it, knowing it was dangerous, but believing that she had no other choice. But now she was regretting it. She had seen the soldiers' faces, cold and merciless, as they grabbed her and dragged her away. They would punish her for this, she knew it. They always did. The penalty for stealing water was always severe. Sometimes it was death. Other times it was something worse. Lyra couldn't even imagine what was waiting for her if she was caught. Her legs were burning as she ran, the sand slipping beneath her feet with each stride. She looked over her shoulder and saw the soldiers closing in. There were 2 of them, both armed and trained to chase down thieves like her. Their voices were getting louder. They were shouting at her to stop. She could hear the anger in their words. They wouldn't show mercy. Lyra's breath came in short gasps as she ducked behind a rock, trying to hide. She could hear the soldiers getting closer, their heavy steps thudding on the ground. If they found her, there was no way out. The soldiers would drag her back to the depot, and the punishment would be swift. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had to escape. She couldn't go back. As she crouched behind the rock, trying to stay silent, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. There was a figure moving in the distance. It was a human. She had heard of them. but she had never seen one before. They were rare on Zorath, just like water. The figure was tall, wearing dark clothing, and carrying some sort of weapon. The human seemed to be walking alone, scanning the horizon as if looking for something. Lyra's eyes widened. Could he be a friend? Could he help her? She had no idea. But she knew she had to act quickly. The soldiers were almost on top of her, and she had no choice but to take the risk. If the human didn't help her, she was as good as dead. Lyra stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. She took a deep breath, pushing away the fear that gripped her chest. She ran toward the human, her legs moving as fast as they could carry. The soldiers saw her now. They shouted for her to stop, but Lyra didn't listen. She had no choice. She had to reach the human. The man saw her coming. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Lyra thought he would run away or turn his weapon on her, but instead, he stepped forward, his posture strong and steady. There was something about him that made Lyra trust him, even if just for a moment. When she reached him, she collapsed at his feet, gasping for breath. She couldn't speak. The fear and exhaustion had taken away her words. She just looked up at him, pleading silently for help. The human looked down at her, his expression unreadable. He seemed to hesitate for just a moment before looking back at the approaching soldiers. The two guards were closing in quickly. There was no time to waste. The man's eyes flicked to the ground, then back at her. Without saying a word, he reached down and pulled Lyra to her feet. His grip was firm, but there was a gentleness to it. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't need to. He could see the fear in her eyes, and that was enough. Lyra's heart raced as the man pulled her away from the soldiers. She wanted to say something to thank him, but her throat was dry, and she couldn't find the words. She just ran with him, hoping he knew where he was going. They didn't speak as they moved. The soldiers were still behind them, but they couldn't catch up. The man was fast, and Lyra was determined to escape. As they ran, Lyra glanced over her shoulder. The soldiers had stopped, but only for a moment. They had seen her with the human. They had seen him help her. That would only make them angrier. Lyra's thoughts raced. What would happen if they caught her again? What would happen to the human? She had no idea who he was or why he helped her, but there was something about him that felt different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't seem to care about the rules. Maybe, just maybe, he would help her escape. They reached a small, hidden cave just as the soldiers started to move again. The man pulled her inside, and they crouched low, waiting. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. They had to stay quiet. If the soldiers found them, there was no escape. But for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hoped that the man didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his eyes calm but serious. He wasn't afraid. It was like he had done this 1,000 times before. But to Lyra, this was a new feeling. She was used to being on her own, fighting for survival. She was used to trusting no one. But this human, this stranger, had risked his life to help her. And for the first time, she realized that not all humans were like the ones who had conquered her world. Maybe, just maybe, this human could be different. As they waited in silence, Lyra's thoughts drifted to her sister. She had to save her. She had stolen the water for a reason. Her sister was dying, and she couldn't afford to fail. But now she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. The decision to intervene. Lyra sat silently in the cave, her breath still heavy from the escape. Her heart pounded against her chest as the sounds of footsteps outside grew louder. She didn't know what to expect. The human had saved her, but what would happen now? She didn't know anything about him. He was a stranger, and yet, in that moment, he had been her only hope. The man stood near the entrance of the cave, watching the desert with his sharp eyes. His face was hard, but there was a kindness in his actions. Lyra felt the weight of the silence between them. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stayed still, trying to calm her racing heart. After what felt like hours, the human finally spoke. His voice was low and steady. "You're safe for now." Lyra looked at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to people being kind to her. She had learned to rely on herself and trust no one. But this man, this human, had done something no one else had. He had risked everything to save her. It made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. "Why did you help me?" Lyra's voice was hoarse from the dry air and fear, but she managed to ask. The question was simple, yet she needed to understand. She had seen humans before, but they were always enemies, fighting to control her people's land. Yet here was one, offering her help. The human turned toward her. His eyes were calm, but there was something in them that Lyra couldn't quite place. Because it was the right thing to do. Lyra stared at him, confused. The right thing to do? It didn't make sense. This man didn't know her or her people. He didn't know how much trouble helping her could bring. If the alien overlords found out what he had done, they would punish him too. It was a dangerous decision, yet he had made it without hesitation. "Do you know what will happen if they catch you?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. "They'll kill you, just like they would have killed me." "Why would you risk your life for someone like me?" The man, Jake, shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but sometimes you don't think about the consequences. You just do what feels right." Lyra's mind raced. She had never met anyone like him before. In her world, survival was everything. It was about staying alive, no matter the cost. But here was a human who didn't seem to care about survival. He cared about doing what was right. It made her question everything she had ever believed in. "But you don't understand," she said softly. "They'll never stop hunting us. If they find us, they'll kill us both." "And for what? Just for trying to survive?" Jake turned and walked over to her, his footsteps steady and calm. He knelt beside her, his eyes level with hers. "I understand more than you think. I've fought in battles, faced death, and seen things that would make most people run. But I also know that if you don't stand up for what's right, then you're just part of the problem." Lyra looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had always been alone, fighting for herself and her people. She had never had someone like Jake by her side. It was a strange feeling, something she couldn't quite wrap her mind around. But she couldn't deny that there was something comforting about having him there. Someone who didn't think about survival first. It was a feeling she wasn't used to. "Why did you choose to help me?" Lyra asked again, her voice quieter this time. "Why not just leave me behind?" Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Because I couldn't. No one should have to live like this. Not you, not anyone." For a moment, Lyra was silent. The sound of the wind outside filled the cave. But inside, it felt like everything had stopped. She didn't know what to think anymore. Jake had given her something she didn't even know she needed, a sense of hope. Her sister's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra saw a spark of life in her. The water was the answer. It was everything. Lyra watched as her sister took the first sip, her face relaxing as the water revived her. "Thank you," her sister whispered, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had saved her sister, but the fight wasn't over yet. Lyra turned to Jake, her eyes serious. "We need to keep moving. We can't stay here for long." The soldiers will come. Jake nodded, his expression grim. We're not done yet. But we've got a good start. And we've got each other. Lyra felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a reason to fight, a reason to hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something bigger. Together, they would keep going, keep fighting. They would change things one step at a time. And no matter what happened, they would do it together. As the two of them stepped out into the fading light of the desert, Lyra couldn't help but smile. She had hope again. She had a future. And with Jake by her side, she knew they could face anything that came their way.